Hi! Today I'm here to talk to you about learning myths. Now, the education industry has always been rife with things that end up becoming hot trends and then often fizzle out. But some hang around, including various learning theories that have morphed into urban legends that people now view as facts. So, my objective for today is to debunk 5 learning myths in 5 minutes. Myth number 1, we only use 10% of our brains. I'm sure you've all heard this statement before. It's a notion that's been propagated by movies, magazines, and motivational speakers, and repeated by well-meaning folks and shysters alike. They tell you that you're only using 10% of your brain. And to just imagine what you could do if you tapped into all of that unused potential. This, however, is not true. And it's so far off, it would be laughable if it weren't so widespread. This myth has been debunked over and over again, but it just won't die. Now, how do we know for sure? For one thing, neuroimaging techniques like CAT scans and MRIs actually let us see the brain in action. These images show us that every region of the brain lights up during even simple tasks like walking and talking. And it also stands to reason that if 90% of your brain was useless, you could remove large portions of it, as you would with your appendix or your tonsils, and be able to carry on as usual. Of course, we can't do that. The reality is that we use 100% of our brains. Now, myth number 2, multitasking is effective. Multitasking is a so-called skill that makes you believe you are getting a lot accomplished while reducing the time it takes to do it. In reality, none of us has the ability to truly multitask because it cannot be done and is really just a myth. Multitasking actually reduces your efficiency and performance because your brain can only focus on one thing at a time. Therefore, multitasking should actually be called task switching, because that is really what is happening. And this continuous switching from one task to another leads to a total lack of focus, making you less productive than if you just did only one thing at a time. Our third myth for today is the learning pyramid. Again, I'm sure you've all seen a figure that looks something like these two. It goes by various names, such as the learning pyramid, the cone of learning, the cone of experience, and a multitude of others. Conveniently, there are different versions out there with different percentages and different variations. Very convenient. Unfortunately, this bogus information has been floating around our field for decades, crafted by many different authors and presented in many different configurations. All of it, however, is fraudulent and is basically hogwash. There is no conclusive evidence in any research to back up any of these average retention rates, and investigations into them have found that they are essentially made up. Just look at it. First off, how did the research produce numbers that are all factors of 10? Isn't that convenient? And then take a look at reading over there and seeing. Don't we have to see in order to read? And over there, what does discuss mean? It says discuss with others. Does that mean people were talking about the information they were learning? And if so, didn't they have to hear what the other person said? And what does doing mean? How much were they doing? Were they doing it correctly? Or did they get feedback? And if they were getting feedback, how do we know that learning didn't come from the feedback and not the doing? As faculty, we need to just stop quoting this fake learning pyramid and instead just utilize active learning in all of our classrooms. There's a school of thought that people are either left brain or right brain dominant, which is our fourth myth. Anatomically, the left hemisphere is considered as the logical brain. In contrast, the right hemisphere is known as the creative brain. Based on these two categorizations, there is a popular assumption that right-brainers are generally more creative, intuitive, and artsy, whereas left-brainers are more logical and are overall better problem solvers. The neuroscience community, however, never bought into any of this notion, and researchers have debunked this myth. Using brain imaging, says down there, the University of Utah neuroscientists assert that there is no evidence that some people are right-brained or left-brained, and have debunked this myth, calling it absolute inaccurate. The fact is, you aren't left-brained or right-brained. You are full-brained. This brings us to our fifth and last myth, learning styles. People have different learning styles. We need to design learning to address a variety of them. Or our students will become more successful if we match our teaching styles to their learning styles. I'm sure you've heard something like this, two quotes in regards to learning styles before. However, over and over again, researchers have failed to find any substantive evidence for the notion of learning styles, to the point where it has been designated a myth by many education and psychology experts. However, this myth continues to be endorsed and propagated, but this should stop. It really should, because many leading experts now believe that the myth may actually cause harm due to the fact that it encourages teachers to teach to the students' perceived intellectual strengths rather than their weaknesses. And as we all know, as educators, students need to correct and compensate for their shortcomings, not avoid them. So it may seem obvious, but in conclusion, each and every one of us must take responsibility for the information we transmit to ensure its integrity. More importantly, we must be actively skeptical of the information we receive while checking the facts, investigating the evidence, and evaluating the research. Lastly, we must continue our own personal search for knowledge, for it is only with knowledge that we can evaluate the claims that we encounter. Thank you, and if you'd like to know more information, I've included the research. As a handout, you can look up these sources. There's 3 pages of them. Debunked. Thank you.